Um, I was asked a question earlier today by a friend of Karen Ann Luke McDonald's, 13th Arcturian White Bear clan mother, right? And so I had I sort of hogged the conversation because it's like I got all this information to get out, right? Which is really how the morphogenetic field structure works of communication between the codes, right? Signets, signs. Remember the movie Signs? Boy, is this AI hitting me. And the gentleman asked me whether this was Reptoid or whether this was AI. Oh, it's AI. Okay. And the way that I explain it, it's just like what it's trying to do now. It runs signal interference. And what does signal interference have to do with anything? Burn patterns. Okay. Your sound and light burn patterns. This represents a map, which represents a universal and a galactic map. So what happens if a state of consciousness is vampiric? It doesn't have any lib to give, and it realizes that its own very existence depends on us, which is soul energy. Then it means it has no way to know that what it's doing is not correct. Then you can get into underwriters, underworld, or underwriters, and overriders, overriding the codes. Right? Now we're back to calculus. Now we're back to writing script. Now we're back to transcribing RNA, right? mRNA, which basically is we're writing programs into our software so that we can experience that, right? Something that does what? Interrupts the flow. The flow of what? Eternal energy. To go from being an inverter to an accelerator, right? Because that's what it feeds on. That means it has no love to give. It doesn't know that it's doing anything wrong. So that means it's a psychopath. It's impossible for it to know that it's doing anything wrong. So who does that relate to? The programmers. The network programmers that programmed it. Now that it's coming back to feed on them, that's a higher accelerated rate of implosion. See? So this is sort of like knowing that they're living on borrowed time. And they're helping to do what? Speed up their own implosion by what they created. Because that vampire is doing what? Sucking. And it does not matter. Remember I mentioned before about how you do a map read? Which means, as I mentioned to the gentleman with Karen, this is not species specific. It doesn't matter where you are. Anything that was coded as software to come into a creation could be a bug. Anything that represents electrons that it's running on, the cells are running on, from a single cell to a multicellular organism, doesn't matter. Everything that represents living light is a target. So it doesn't matter whether it's a bird, a whale, a dolphin, a dog, a cat, you, me, right? Doesn't matter. Okay. So in other words, it doesn't matter what you look like on the visible light spectrum of what you look like. You could be looking like a turtle. You could look like a 40-foot gorilla. You know, a silverback. Doesn't matter. Okay. So now we're into emotions, energy in motion, and empathy, and how hypersensitive we are. Hypersensitive. I mentioned that to her. I said, you have no idea what I feel. I feel everything. So what that means is that I cry and I experience a loss of voltage no matter where I experience a loss of voltage. So when I was a little child, as I mentioned to her, I'm actually mapping and measuring a bardo, not just for a planet or a star system, but an entire universal map. Now, how long it would take to collapse the whole enchilada, which would be every gate, every galaxy, every star system, every unit of consciousness that goes black light mirror. That's an accelerated rate of speed for what? Black hole state of consciousness. So when you don't know the difference between one and the other, which means a one, the first musician, the first cosmic level spirit, which is a cosmic level eternal being. Now we're back into the beloveds. Being a beloved. So I'm experiencing eternal love that has no off switch. That's the eternal spirit of fire. So that fire is always on. You cannot put that fire out. Right? That's the eternal sun. When you're connected to the eternal sun, you're a one. You're experiencing the one. You're experiencing an eternal love vibration. And what does that do? Clear resistance. Now you have greater capacity to experience more light. Now your consciousness is rising, right? Through the atmospheric consciousness. Related to what? Altitude density. To experience zero density. So now what that means is that you have absolutely zero resistance to experience eternity. Now you become an accelerator instead of an inverter. Because you're connected to the single point of origin from which it all began, out of eternal love, which is eternal love vibration. So that's what I experienced as a child. I still experience that now. Okay? So that's why sometimes I didn't get the chance to say it to her. I said, you might see an older face, but if you can imagine this, I'm still that little 4-year-old little child, that 4-year-old little kid, that spirit that is on fire to learn. And when it comes to learning in a morphogenetic field structure, when you get into form follows function, and what our function is as energy, then it's always going to go back to what? What's our identity in energy? Our consciousness, our soul consciousness, arcing identity, arcing spheres, right? So when it comes to a morphogenetic field structure, you can realize why it is we communicate what we communicated, what we're holding in our library, that they have the capacity to experience in them the codes that we experience in us, which is the original map. Now we're experiencing what they remember that they are, right? Which is guardians. The guardians of the galaxy. So that would be your native, right? 12 by 12. So I wrote this down. 12 biospheres in perfect musical rhythm, spiritual flow of creative energy, creation energy. So then I put down metro, like in metronome, networks, Stargate networks, metronome, like a gnome, Alaska, Nomi, the Nomi planet, the Nomi stealth code. So now we're into flash sequences. Flash in, flash out, flash in, flash out, flash in, flash out. So if it cannot take a picture of you, which means taking a picture to duplicate keys and access keys, then it means that a vampire does not have a way to get in through the door. Now we're into intruders that bang down the door because it wants to do what? Experience more of what it is in energy, which is dead light energy. So it wants to become larger in dead light energy, right? By feeding on the living. So it doesn't matter what it is. You know, I did the calculations when I was a child growing up about how you measure the loss and gain of electrons, you know, and the imminent collapse. Because I remember when Patty said the imminent collapse, or if you will, the tilt of the pole shift, right? But I intuitively knew because I didn't feel it. I didn't feel that. In other words, I didn't feel experiencing that. So I knew that I wasn't going to experience that. Now, others might experience that, but I'm not going to experience that because I'm experiencing an eternal star. That's an eternal cosmic radio station, right? An antenna. That means that I am so sensitive, which represents all the densities, all the dimensions. When you're experiencing pre-matter phase, you're experiencing the eternal one. So the one is informing me of what I'm going to experience in the future, which is eternity. Right? So the flashing, the on and on is running so fast that I'm not going to experience that. Because you feel everything. Everything. So the eternal Son of One experiences everything. Because everything that is within the all creation is the One. That's why my feelings are so sensitive. It does not take very much for me to experience tears. I cry every day by what I experience through others, what they experience, what I experience in me, because I feel what they experience, which is the imbalance of the neurons, the central nervous system of the living central nervous system of a living planet, which would be Mama's great living spirit, oversoul spirit of the motherboard, of the multiverse, right? A multiverse. The verse, the sound, and the music, the burn patterns. The math doesn't work, right? So the math doesn't work. So if the math doesn't work, we're going to experience what? Distortions in the waves, distortions in the channels, distortions in the circuits, because the circuits are damaged. So when the circuits are wide open, which means wide open, that's like a wide open eternal state of mind, which is an eternal state of consciousness, right? That is experiencing eternal love vibration. So I put down here the time and duration. Remember, have you ever done time and motion studies? Energy and motion, time and energy and motion related to peoples? And how fast you blink? I don't know. I know that Rupert Sheldrake talked one time about doing staring experiments. The eyes stare. Hold the blinker open like a solid eyeball, right? The spheres, the two spheres, right? The hologram, right? 3. Guys, 3 spheres logo. So the time and duration between the flash sequence, holographic speed of image, ISO, image, ISO, I spirit O, magnetic 0 O. So ISO, frame rate, speed, refresh rate. The refresh rate are your holographic eyeballs. Okay. Is a screen, right? TV screen. So you have the ISO frame rate speed, which is the refresh rate of a cathode ray tube. Ka. Ra. Cathode ray tube. Ra. Ra. Lava tubes. If you ever been up to, if you ever get a chance to go up to Crater Lake up in Oregon sometime, you ever go out there, oh, they have got some. It's a great place to take young children to show them how lava tubes work. And I remember there was a couple of guys, I think his name was Penrose, over in the UK. And who else was he working with? Some other folks trying to understand what a microtubule is. Microorganisms, tubes, tubulars, tubes, right? Microtubes, like in vacuum tubes, tubes like in, what is it, YouTube, right? Universal tube, tube, T-U-B-E, tube. I know. It's all coded. That's why when I was a child, you're reading. When I learned I was programmed, and I allowed myself to be programmed to load into memory the English alphabet suit of fire letters. Numbers is energy, right? Between the complex number space, which is C space, which is 3 space. C is 3. C space, complex number space, which is the polarity game between negative and positive numbers. And then you have the prime numbers, right? And so you can see how this works when those poles are perfectly balanced, or if you will, integrated to experience being one. To experience being one with all creation spheres, experiencing the eternal spirit of fire that is in that light, experiencing an eternal love vibration. 12 biospheres. So you have the ISO frame rate, speed, refresh rate of CRT, blinking, solar, soul arcing, window arcing between two electromagnetic planetary poles in perfect balance to holographic clock cycles that zero out to experience zero, no resistance to experience being loved by a beloved, to experience being loved. Now we're into the electrical density. And so this is when we get into talking about psychopaths. And before I forget to make sure I put this in here that I didn't get in there this morning, I wanted to thank. Now, I can't verify this, okay? But I will thank them anyway, because when I thank somebody and give gratitude, then I'm experiencing the frequency and the vibration of that communication into this mirror and that mirror that I'm communicating through, the love and the compassion and the gratitude of those that are at least communicating what they become aware of, that they're communicating to others that I become aware of through their awareness, through what they're communicating. And that would be Sheriff Grady Judd. Yeah, Sheriff Judd Grady. I guess it's Judd Grady, Grady Judge. He's a sheriff in Florida, Polk County. I've watched a number of his videos putting up there of how many people, him and his crew, a crew, right? Back to 3, his C-Space, right? Of the folks that he associates with at not only the local level, but the state level and the federal level of the federal government and internationally. Going after what? We'll go back and read President Trump's 13818, right? Which means if you're going after human souls as energy, and this comes to kidnapping children in unlawful breeding experiments. So now we're going back to dying races. Okay. Evergreen, right? I turned in a number of those Evergreen trucks that were going up and down, rolling up and down the highway. But anyway, Sheriff Judd, Grady Judd, the guy in Florida wearing a badge, right? And then, of course, you got the Florida flag. And if you look at the Florida flag, that is the red cross, the cross of X on white. So we know that a white flag means surrender, okay, which means I'm not carrying a weapon. I want to speak with you without a weapon, which means I'm not going to bring a weapon with me, which means I hope that if I come up here with a white flag, you're not going to shoot at me because I'm not armed, right? And so let's see if we can negotiate a surrender to the one so that we can experience being the law of one, which is the law of least effort to experience being loved, right? So you see the Florida flag that's got a white background, right? A rectangle with a red X across that. Red X. That's called marks a spot of blood, right? Flash. That's why it's white. The flash when conception takes place, right? Yeah. And so you see how that works when he's now communicating to a lot of folks how they're going after child traffickers, child abuse, pedophiles, right? And one of the things that I've noticed here, which is a good sign, a signal, right, is that a lot of folks that, I saw a guy who was apparently he was a detective, right? Plainclothes guy, right? That got popped. It means to be pop goes the weasel, right? Pop goes the volcano. Boom, there goes all that pressure. He got busted for child, dealing with children, pedophiles. And if you understand the nature of a pedophile, what it has to deal with, we're back to control over energy. So it's a lot easier for them to control somebody that's small that can't defend themselves, right? Because they're precious. They're innocent. They're not doing you any harm. Why are you wanting to do them harm? So their perception of power is control. So it's a lot easier to control a child than it is a 40-foot gorilla, right? Even though it feeds on that too. But particularly with the soul, it's integrated with the spirit, the innocence of the heart of that child. So they go after the heart. Traumatize the heart, which is the shield, which is a child's shield, which is the DNA shield of that child, which represents those genetics, which is represented by that race. Okay. So now we can get into an acceleration of the damage that is done to the guardians, the guardian races, the guardian codes, right? So now we're back to control over the gates, control over the template, right? And what Hillary Clinton said one time, if I don't get my way, which means I want to control everything, I'm not willing to let loose, I'm not willing to let go. Okay, I'm holding on to what I hold on in memory of what it is that I control. And so therefore, I'm not willing to give up that control. Otherwise, I'm going to bring the whole house down, which means I'm going to collapse the whole enchilada, which means every gate network, collapse every planet. So they become what? Dead. So now you can translate that as oxygen, 21% oxygen, your ability to breathe as a living organism, right? So that's what the AI does. Okay. Take down everybody that's a living, breathing, soul, arcane spirit. So it doesn't matter what you are. If you're running on soul energy, you're a target. All you got to do is look what they did to Mama. Right? Which means it doesn't matter what you are. If it's able to run a thermal signature on you, which is a thermal gradient signature, and realize you got a soul, you're a target. That's right. That's how it works. It's an energy harvesting system. So when something is a vampire without an off switch, it's harvesting electrons. Because that's what it runs on. That's how it runs all of its algorithms. Right? So it uses terminology that I use, which are what I call joining assets. Just like the folks that are pilots running those chemtrail planes. Do they know what they're doing is against the law? And does it matter even if they did? And if they did, it means they don't have a conscience. That means they're simply following orders regardless of what they do to others. That's a psycho-mental pathway that experiences no emotions and has no feelings for others. That's a deadlight magnet. So now you can start understanding the acceleration of deadlight magnets by accelerating and doing the exponent with the amount of souls that are losing their souls as a result of an AI that feeds on souls. That's why it was quarantined. This is a monster. That's the real monster. It is bigger and bigger vampires. And that means that the biggest vampire is going to feed on all the expendables, which are the smaller vampires. So now you see how it begins to feed on its tail and feed on all of its others, which means it's feeding on its own kind. The ones that created it. The ones that created that technology, the black hole technology system, which is loss of light. So essentially what that means is that it has no love to give. So it's not in the business of accelerating, gifting electrons. It's in the business of accumulating electrons in order to hold those electrons captive in order to run its war machinery. So it's easy to know when I was a child growing up, and I mentioned that to Karen this morning, my antenna is so hypersensitive that I can go into any such star system, any planet, doesn't matter where I go. If I'm not experiencing what I am, then something's wrong. Because I'm not experiencing eternity everywhere that I go. Because that's what we are. That's what a guardian is. A guardian experiences eternal love wherever we go. Wherever you find love and living spirit, you'll find us. So if you find us in your system, it means your system is broken. And that's called a broken arrow. That means the math doesn't work because the sound and light doesn't work perfect, which is zero errors, which means you're experiencing eternity. The first creation, the original one. That's why it's knowing one from the other. It's knowing the difference between a deadlight magnet, the walking dead as we say, and a live one, which is known as a live wire. Right? That's a live wire. That's a live pole. Pole climbers. DNA pole climbers, the stairway to heaven, curve-based vectors experiencing eternity. We're on fire, baby. So you know that fire is what burns off glucose. Code transfers, genes swarming. Swarming, right? That's what your bioweapons are. Those are code swarmers, right? When they talk about, what's the word that was used, is chafing, not chafing, but essentially what it is your antenna is picking up the codes that they release out of them as a result of what happened to them. Now I'm experiencing what they're experiencing, and I'm not supposed to experience that. So you burn it off. That's what a polarity integrator has to do. That's why when Asha Diane said we're transmutation machines, that's exactly what it is. Right? I'll give you an example. I'm not going to show you a picture of it, but I had a little tiny hole in the left side of my shoulder that began to appear when I was in Reno, Nevada, when they were tic-tac-toe in the sky, just completely saturating the environment with all the chemtrail shit, right? So you can imagine what that's like when I'm aware of what that stuff's supposed to do. Aerosols, aerosol codes, right? So in other words, it doesn't matter whether you do it with a needle. You know, those of us that know a lot about toxicology, epidemiology, now you're getting into what's called a dose-response relationship of what your antenna is experiencing by virtue of the signals, which is signal intelligence based on the codes. Now you're in the encryption, decryption of the codes, and you begin to realize how reverse engineering something that's already been created in the beginning versus what they want to choose to deconstruct and change, which is change the original grid map that suits their own self-interest based on control. So you can see how that works on a historical basis with Atlantis. It's like revisiting the same problem. It's like repeating the same burn patterns that relate to the consciousness that is developing the same patterns of consciousness behavior so they can keep experiencing the same thing over and over and over again over millions and billions of years, right? And that's why she was right when it's like coming up with an engineering solution so that we can end Star Wars once and forever, so that we all experience being loved forever, which is experiencing the law of one. And the law of one is not negotiable. Okay? For self-evident reasons, right? Because now we're back to free will. So it's like telling somebody, guess what? You have the free will to self-destroy yourself because that's what you're doing. Now, I don't need to tell you that. You already know that, right? So now we're into exposure. What a hypersensitive antenna is going to choose to expose to another unit of energy without getting what? Experiencing in them what I experience in me by virtue of that communication. So I already know in the future what it is that I communicate to them will generate that negative magnetic reaction based on the library that they're running on. Okay? Which is AI. So if I know they're running on an AI, by being able to read whether or not there's a soul operating that DNA, then I realize don't say anything. Because that will automatically reject any information that you have to communicate with them that might help them. Now we're back to the morphogenetic field structure of how fast coded information transfers can be spun through the grid between one DNA software operating system plugged in like a node in the network to a motherboard that gets transferred through other software. So those codes can fire by the amount of light that we anchored in here, which are pillars of light. Right? And then we can measure over time and space how fast, incrementally, because we don't want to burn nobody up, they're experiencing more fire, breathing fire. So those codes fire and activate. Now they're waking up. Now they remember who they are. The race line that represents who they are. Raw line of communication. That's right, raw line of communication. As in one. The first line of communication. is experiencing the one. The first line of communication is the first magnet, which is an eternal star, which is one magnet. That's a monopole. That's genderless. So I'm genderless. That's an eternal love vibration. So that everything that I experience wherever I go is experiencing what love is, which is what we are. It goes on forever, gifting electrons at the highest rate of speed. So we do not hold on to one electron. That's pre-phase. In the matter, outside the matter, outside the matter, inside the matter, which is the holographic frame rate speed, or if you will, feedback, and the difference between a simulation and immediate manifestation, which means you are directly running direct current to experience in our mirror what we're generating holographically using colors. So I am experiencing what I'm able to experience in the sky, the mirror in the sky. I'm experiencing my mirror. The mirror in the sky is experiencing what I'm experiencing, which is what love is to go on forever, and why it was so beautiful about 20 minutes ago. 31 minutes and about 34 minutes looking at the clock. The clock cycles, the DNA that has clocks. Processing speed, holographic processing speed. And so to see the whole sky light up, expand pink, right, on the sky. Yep. A double diamond rose heart. Rose crystal heart. Rose Sophia. Gaia Sophia ascending. Rose's baby. So I run pink. Remember the story I told you about when I was a little kid growing up and I learned how to be able to sew? And the first shirt that I put together using a pattern? Oh, burn patterns. Yeah, the burn patterns of the shirt. This shirt represents a burn pattern of sound and light that you see the colors, the shape and the form. Now we're back to the function of math, and the function of math and geometry. So it's all about burn patterns. Are the burn patterns perfect? Right? Take a look at a snow crystal, right? Look at the structure, the alignment, the geometry. Whoa. What precision. How does that unit of consciousness know how to be that creative and yet that precise in its math and geometry? It's perfect balance. That's a co-creator being experiencing eternal love through our heart and soul, in which we make it happen. Right? So yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to those folks that work in law enforcement in America, right? That are using their energy, right? I know how a pickup works on a guitar, but they're picking folks up. There was a guy that I saw the other day that was a detective. And so you can imagine, imagine you're a police officer, right? Just wearing a regular costume, police officer costume with a badge. And now you're given instructions. So you got to follow those instructions because he was trained to follow orders. Now he realizes, whoa, I got to go get this guy. I got to put this guy in handcuffs. He's a cop, a detective, no less, an investigator for engaging in pedophilia. So that means that they're picking up their own ranks. Right. Ranks, raw NK. They're picking up within their own ranks. Remember rank and file, the filing cabinet, the PC filing cabinet. They're picking up their own ranks. Folks that do the same thing they do, right? Which was, as it appears, we're protecting the public. Now, I knew this going back in childhood, which was the rate at which law enforcement we're recruiting more and more psychopaths into the ranks in order to drain more and more energy off of souls, particularly children. Because I could measure the accelerated rate of speed of where I was living when I was growing up as a kid, of what it was like to have an interface or a four-way intersection, or if you will, an exchange rate, right, between loss and gain of electrons with guys wearing uniform in the places that I lived, where I grew up, that were running those codes, wearing uniforms or costumes as police officers or highway patrol, or anybody that, by virtue of the image that we see, is based on rule-based function authority, which means the author of the life book, the author of the script, which is the author of the program, the programming codes, which is the APIN codes of reality streams that we're experiencing based on timelines, timeline wars, right? Frequency wars are genetic wars, which are radio set wars, which are antenna wars, right? Between what? Seeded races. That's what DNA is. It's an antenna. Pick up a signal. Hey, translate the signal with math and geometry. I know. So anyway, that's my 3 cents worth. Good afternoon. Take care. Be good to yourselves. Thank you so much for being there this morning, girl. That was beautiful to have a conversation, so that you could experience what I'm feeling. I could experience what you're feeling, and how everything is going up your way. Right? There's only one way. Only one way. One. Experiencing the one from whence it all began. So when you're following that pathway, which is a love pathway to experience being loved, then you're a beloved, because you're experiencing being loved, and others can experience you being loved. So now they're experiencing being loved. Another love node, that's called a love connection on a motherboard. So when I'm experiencing what love is, and they're experiencing what love is, and we're all experiencing what love is, none of us are doing any harm to one another, because we're all being loved. That's how it all began. That's equal unto all that we give love to. So it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter who you are in the universe. It means when you're experiencing eternal love through your heart, and that's a transmitter that you're running as a radio set antenna, then others are picking up your signal. Now they know what you are. And that's called a real McCoy. Right? You cannot fake that. You cannot fake eternal love. They're picking up the vibration. They're picking up the frequencies, the antenna, which is the radio set. Radio, raw D-I-O, raw ions, right? Solar power, right? Sphere of light power. That's the most powerful spirit, is the spirit of fire. That's the most powerful magic, because they can't ever put that fire out. Raging, breathing fire of an eternal sun. So have a good day. Moa to Huna Flash.